Welcome back to The Explainer. So when we hear the word marriage, most of us immediately picture the romance, right? The grand ceremonies, the lifelong companionship, the poetry of it all. But today we're actually going to look past the flowers and the fairy tales. We're going to examine marriage not just as a romantic ideal, but as a seriously complex, meticulously structured piece of social technology. Because when you really get down to it, it is quite literally the architecture of human society. Let's get into it.
So let's kick things off with a pretty foundational question. What is marriage, really? And I want to challenge your everyday assumptions here. If we step back and look at this totally universal institution through a purely sociological lens, just completely stripping away the Hollywood movies, what's the actual machinery at work? Like, what does this institution actually do for humanity? Well, to set our analytical tone, take a listen to this definition from the anthropologist Malinowski. He said, "Marriage is a contract for the production and maintenance of children." Wow, okay, sounds a little clinical, doesn't it? But at its absolute core, from a strictly sociological standpoint, marriage really is a socially sanctioned contract. It's a highly pragmatic agreement designed to basically ensure the survival and the structural integrity of the next generation. Here is our game plan for today. We'll start with the universal institution, look at the core functions, dive into classifying marriage types, outline the rules of selection, and finally wrap up with changing modern trends. All right, Section 1, the universal institution. The basic characteristics of this bond are actually remarkably consistent across the entire globe. First off, it takes place between adults, and it always requires some sort of civil or religious ceremony. Now, why is that? Well, because that ceremony provides social sanction. It's basically society witnessing and giving a formal thumbs up to the union. It forms an enduring bond, and critically, it brings completely different families together into a vetted social contract that legalizes rights, property, and family obligations. It is the absolute legal and social bedrock of the family unit. Moving right along to Section 2, the core functions. Think of marriage as the ultimate societal glue. It organizes so many different chaotic aspects of human life. Biologically, it regulates sexual behavior and fulfills our reproductive drives. Economically, it establishes a division of labor and a shared responsibility for uplifting the family. Socially, it completely expands our networks. Your spouse's family literally becomes your family, and it clearly assigns who is strictly responsible for raising the children. And educationally, it ensures that culture actually gets passed down to the next generation. Interestingly enough, our source material even notes that this structured sharing of emotional and economic burdens actually results in married people generally living healthier, more balanced lives. Okay, Section 3, classifying marriage types. Human relationships are incredibly complex. Broadly speaking, society divides marriage into two main buckets, monogamy and polygamy. But as we dive in, we'll see those branches extend way, way further down into very specific, structurally distinct forms of cohabitation. Let's break them down. Let's start with monogamy, which is definitely the most accepted and enduring form globally. Now, this can be serial, meaning you might remarry after a divorce or the passing of a spouse, or non-serial, where you literally only ever have one spouse. Sociologically speaking, monogamy is considered highly rational. It provides a stable sex life, ensures proper care for the kids, upholds gender equality, and really helps minimize jealousy within the family unit. In fact, according to the text, the sole structural disadvantage that's commonly cited is that it can result in what they term monogamous boredom, which, let's be honest, can sometimes unfortunately lead to divorce. Now, looking at the other side of the tree, we have polygamy, which involves a plurality of partners. This breaks down into polygyny, where one man has multiple wives, and polyandry, where one woman has multiple husbands. And these get even more specific. For example, if the multiple wives are sisters, that's called sororal polygyny. If the husbands are brothers, it's fraternal polyandry. What is truly fascinating here are the societal causes for these structures. The text points out that polyandry often arises from a skewed, negative female sex ratio. Or it comes from extreme economic factors, like simply not being able to afford high tribal bride prices, which leads brothers to pool their resources and share a wife. Next up, Section 4, rules of selection. It is absolutely fascinating how every traditional society balances two diametrically opposed forces when it comes to choosing a mate. We're talking about endogamy and exogamy. Every society balances these two rules to somehow maintain both social order and biological health. Let's really contrast these two because they are super important. Endogamy is the rule that you absolutely must select a mate from inside your specific group, like your caste or your tribe. This acts as a conservative protection. It preserves the group's perceived purity, their status, and crucially, it keeps property consolidated within that group. But on the flip side, it can definitely foster ethnocentrism. Exogamy, on the other hand, is the strict prohibition of marrying inside your own blood or kin group, and this provides massive progressive biological benefits. By forcing people to marry outside their close kin, it prevents congenital health problems from inbreeding, which of course leads to much healthier offspring.
The meticulous precision of these kinship restrictions is just incredible. For example, Gotra exogamy means you have to marry outside your specific clan that traces back to a common ancestor. Sapinda exogamy is honestly incredibly mathematically precise. It specifically prohibits marriage within 5 generations on the mother's side and 7 generations on the father's side. There's also village exogamy, where simply being from the exact same village means you cannot marry each other. It's a brilliant built-in way to ensure genetic diversity across different geographic regions. When we look at how different groups interact, we see some very strict directional biases, governed by the rules of hypergamy and hypogamy. Hypergamy, or anuloma, is socially accepted. This is where a man from a higher caste marries a woman of the same or a lower caste. However, hypogamy, or protoloma, where a lower caste man marries a higher caste woman, is the complete diametric opposite. Historically, this was traditionally condemned and deeply unapproved. It really highlights the strict social hierarchies that were so deeply embedded in traditional mate selection.
Of course, these rules take on starkly different forms depending on geography. In rural, agrarian societies, the text notes some very specific phenomena. There's a high incidence of child marriage, which is driven heavily by the constant need for additional agricultural labor, along with lower literacy rates. Women often have a much lower status in these conjugal relations due to sheer economic dependence. You also see pragmatic practices like marriage by exchange, where a brother and sister marry another brother and sister pair just to entirely avoid paying expensive bride prices. These marriages are strictly arranged, and as a result, divorce rates are remarkably low.
Finally, let's jump to Section 5, Changing Modern Trends. Today, we are seeing a massive shift in all of this. Strict parental control over mate selection is steadily giving way to individuals choosing their own partners. The age of marriage has increased significantly, both legally and practically, driven by a huge desire for higher education and economic independence for both men and women. And that rigid, historical division of labor, it is being totally replaced by shared household responsibilities as more and more women take up active, full-time employment.
But, this rapid modernization definitely comes with some friction. Just consider this number from our source text, 3,000. That is the number of divorce cases being filed every single year before the family court in the city of Bangalore alone. It really emphasizes a modern rise in marital dissolution, which is largely driven by changing roles, a lack of compatibility, and sometimes darker persisting issues. And that really leads us to the paradoxes in modern marriage. On one hand, there's incredible progress. Intercommunity marriages are super common now, breaking down those old barriers, and widow remarriage is fully legally recognized and widely accepted. But while the traditional religious rituals are being minimized, the actual wedding celebrations have become these massive status symbols, emphasizing pomp and sheer luxury. And even more seriously, dangerous expectations like the dowry system still persist as a deeply harmful practice in certain regions, completely despite strict legal prohibition acts. So modernity certainly hasn't erased all the old flaws. And before we finish, we really can't ignore the bureaucratic reality of all this. From a pure management perspective, modern systems entirely rely on this ancient contract. Employers use marital status as the absolute structural basis for granting leave, establishing legal dependence, providing healthcare, and administering workmen's compensation. Society's entire administrative backbone is quite literally built right on top of this ancient social institution. So we've journeyed all the way from ancient biological imperatives to corporate human resources, and it leaves us with a pretty massive thought. As education, modern economics, and the drive for equality continue to reshape our world, how will the rules of this universal institution continue to adapt in the 21st century? I mean, what will the architecture of society even look like 50 years from now? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating social technology with me today. Keep questioning the everyday norms around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.